Fintech Chatter, brought to you by Tier 1 People, leaders in Fintech executive search. Welcome to Fintech Chatter, the show where I meet with fintech leaders for a bit of a chat. I'm your host, Dexter Cousins, and today's guest is Leda Glyptis, Chief Commercial Officer of 10X and author of Bankers Like Us. Leda and I caught up recently in Sydney to talk about her new book, which is a career manual for anyone in banking trying to drive change. We are all friends, so we tend to go off on a few tangents in this chat. But we talk about the process she went through writing her first book, the new challenge facing banks, and why core banking innovation is more urgent than ever. But before I chat to Leda, if you're new to the show, make sure to hit follow and leave a review. It really helps other fintech fans like you discover the show, promotes our awesome guests, and it makes me happy. A trifecta of goodness with one click. I guess, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
I read the book on a trip to Sydney recently and kind of read it on the train and then on the way back. And I think I said to you when I got about 100 and odd pages into it, that it felt as if you and I were at dinner and I was having a conversation with you. And I asked the question, like, was that intentional?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was intentional.
Yeah. It was amazing, right? And I'd vowed actually this year that I wasn't going to read any more books because I was just so fed up of there being references to Stoicism, the kind of Colonel Saunders, story about handling rejection. And your book was filled with just personal stories, kind of examples, situations that made it, kind of just such a kind of intimate experience.
And that was the intention. And I'm very happy felt that way. It resonated. It's interesting because people who know me like you say I could hear your voice.
Yeah.
I read it in your voice.
Well, I could see your hands moving at the time.
And another thing.
Right, it was literally, as you were kind of going through some of the examples, particularly the ones that, were frustrating.
Yeah.
Where I could just see the hands going.
Exactly, yeah. And I think it has worked the other way as well, because a couple of people have messaged me on LinkedIn or approached me that don't actually know me. And then they hear me speak for the first time and go, oh my God, you speak exactly how you write. It's actually the other way around. But it is, you're right. It's a set of very personal experiences. And part of the reason for that is that in my career of the last 20 years, people always find very specific and minutely detailed reasons why they're special, they're different, things don't apply to them, things are unique. And I find that even though these excuses tend to be displacement, they're just that, excuses. You need to fight them in the detail.
Yeah.
You need to go deep into the weeds of whatever it is that's making the conversations difficult. And one of my frustrations with a lot of the books we see in the industry is that they're too abstract, too theoretical. A lot of it is repetitive. You're absolutely right. But you finish reading and you go, well, what am I supposed to do with this now?
Yeah.
I haven't had a new idea reading this, and I haven't got any practical applications on things that would force me or encourage me or help me to reflect and do things differently. So I don't think I bring any new ideas, to be honest with you. I don't think my book is that. But I'd like to think that it does offer some practical ideas on things you could do differently. If these things frustrate you as well.
Yeah. It was kind of like a chicken soup for the soul for bankers, right?
That.
Like it's kind of
chicken
that's what
soup
it
for
reminded
the soul.
me. Yeah.
Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah, it's what it reminded me of was, these kind of little kind of stories or tales or examples where you could just go, I've been through that before. And it's, I find this in my work, right? When I'm sitting with a chief exec, it's a lonely place to be, right? And you think you're the only one that's failing or not doing well when everybody's having the same experience, just they might not be verbalizing it in the media or kind of externally. And I think that kind of connection comes from, hey, we're all we're all experiencing the same things. We all have the same frustrations. And I think the other thing that, and you said about not getting ideas from books, and it's one of the frustrations that I've had with reading books is there haven't been any new ideas. And it's very hard to be original. But the reality is, right, is that the world that you're in, it just is the world, right? We can fight to change it as much as we want, right? But it is what it is, right? It's kind of the DNA of it. And I think that's what is so interesting about your book, is that it's kind of just the kind of DNA of what it's like to work in a bank.
Yeah, I'm obviously well chuffed you feel that way, but it's an interesting one because as I started writing it, my publisher is not a financial services publisher; it's an academic publisher in the US, and they rightly pointed out that a lot of what I was saying could be relevant to anyone operating in large scale change or in a shifting industry, and we toyed with the idea of trying to open it up to non-bankers. And actually, I'd like to think that it's written in a way that if a non-banker picked it up, maybe they would skip some of the examples, but it would still resonate. But what I was saying to you earlier really held me back. And I made it very specifically about our industry because I really do think that the devil is in the detail. Yeah. In the detail is where you make it relevant and relatable and actionable if somebody chooses to. But the detail can't be faked. Yeah. I've read books, again, in the industry over the years where you're like, what are you talking about? Yeah. That's not how it works.
I mean, even not in the industry, right? I mean, I went on a Simon Sinek crusade because I was just so frustrated that it was like just this vanilla, kind of, metaphors and stories, and they're not even true, right? And it's kind of... So everything's got a Hollywood ending, right? And it's like the meaning isn't in the kind of story that's being told. And I think that this was the other thing that really struck me about your book, particularly at the time that we're in and the moment that we're in, is that it was also, almost like a manual for dealing with change. And not just change in your career, or change in a business, but just change in life. And the kind of, the qualities that, and the things that you have to face, right, to slay the dragon, so to speak.
Yeah, interesting. I suppose it's the same qualities that make you not lose focus, be resilient, decide which battles you're going to fight and which hills you're going to die on. And the reality is it's only going to get harder. And I've been saying that for years, and I've very much made that point in the book. It's going to get harder because we've been reluctant. There are things that we could have done and we haven't. And now all the things have to happen at once.
Do you think it could also be getting harder because in about a decade's time, most banks are going to be operating with mainframes that are nearly 100 years old?
Well, I think that's already not scaring people enough. Yeah. If I'm honest, I would expect people to be panicking about this much more. And I do reference those COBOL mainframes in the book. I worked with a bank a few years back that had death on their risk register. And, we're all dying slowly and inexorably. But they meant much more specifically because, of course, COBOL has natural language components. Children who may never have seen COBOL. And in certain countries, they're dying. The people who know how to do this are dying. Which is not funny at all, but it's also not surprising. Yeah. And yet you're seeing all these organizations choosing to spend time, money, and headspace on other things. And it's a choice. Yeah. And I think one of the things that I did try to bring out in the book is it may not be a good choice, but that's the choice you've got. Yeah. And we've learned the hard way that by leaving things, they don't go away. They don't magically resolve themselves. The Hollywood endings don't materialize unassisted. But it's also not all is lost yet. There's quite a lot that can be done. Somebody described the book recently as a self-help manual, which I quite liked. And fundamentally what I've tried to do is, he said, well, look, if you want to do this, if you want to be part of the change, these are some very practical ways you can do it without losing your job, without leading a rebellion. But equally, if you want to drive fundamental change, you need to make radically different decisions. And although it's it's helpful and possible to be part of the change in ways that are small and easy. Big change is neither small nor easy. And you can say that's not for me, and I respect that. But we need to stop pretending that either we have no choice or it's not possible, because it's possible and we have the choice. We just need to exercise it.
So here in Oz, we've had a tumultuous period over the last 5-6 years for people within the banking industry. Royal Commission, a lot of bank bashing going on. It's kind of abated a little bit, but nonetheless, I've got so many people in my network who are in major banks who are like working their guts out, trying to make a better experience. And I had an experience recently where I needed to buy a new car, thought I'll do it through the business. I've got my business bank, my home loan, my personal accounts, all with the same bank, and I have never had an experience as bad as this, right? And like when I contrast the digital experience that I have as a consumer versus a business owner, they're just a million miles away.
And I think we're all out of excuses, because you and I and most of the people listening to us know exactly why that's the case. Yeah. Because the organizations grew up around business silos, because they have different systems, because budgets have been spent differently, because Bobby over there and Johnny over there don't like each other enough to collaborate. And all of those are real material constraints. Yeah. But it's also not enough of an excuse anymore. Yeah. And what I find interesting is that a lot of the fintech ecosystem, look, we're part of it. And I'm sure that I've been guilty of being flippant at times, but the ecosystem has been very dismissive of the bank's efforts.
Yeah.
That's unfair.
Yeah. Oh, look, it is. And this is the kind of interesting thing, right? It's like, I'm commending the bank for what they're doing on a consumer side. Now, actually what they've done is they've actually tried to replicate that
and it doesn't
on the
work.
Business side. This is kind of where, to your point, they're doing the right things, but somehow, there's not the kind of the connection or the bit that makes it work.
I think we can all agree that it's hard.
Yeah,
it's hard to get it right, and it's hard to change. It's easier to build from a blank sheet of paper than to change what you have. But why is it so hard? And why are they getting it wrong? I think it's fair to say that we've been slow to get going. And that's really biting us a little bit now as an industry. The second thing is that, and I do spend quite a lot of time on it in the book, the way we make decisions, the tools we make to manage projects, the processes we employ to select vendors or to track progress, and the way we incentivize people in their work are all counterintuitive for a digital era. So it is hard because you're walking through treacle. You're going against the grain operationally of the organization. And fundamentally, that's the tenor of the book, right? It's not a technological issue that we need to solve. It's an organizational one and a human one.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be easier because it's not technology. But if you look at it as a consumer, it's very easy to go, oh my God, how can you get it wrong when the economy is fully digital now? So you don't even need to reinvent the wheel. You can look at what others are doing, either your competitors or in adjacent industries, and understand what a good integrated UX UI is, what a good experience is, which steps are not necessary. But then you and I also both know that the reasons that this is hard inside the bank has everything to do with structure, organization, with processes and tooling, and nothing to do with the fact that whether they understand or not. That said, usually that's where we stop, and that's what my book is suggesting. Accepting that that's the problem isn't the end of the conversation. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, what man made, man can unmake.
Yeah. It's really interesting, though, to hear you share all of this, because if I look over the journey just that I've kind of been on this last 7 years, and at the end of last year, a real highlight was invited by National Australia Bank to go and record a live podcast at one of their internal conferences.
Nice.
And it was, basically they brought all of their product owners together. I think there's around about 300 people in the audience, about 1,000 people all up, tuned in on. And it was fantastic to see. I think one was the level of enthusiasm, but also the hunger for knowledge, and also, the intent and the will of all of these people to delight their customers.
Yeah, that's nice.
And to have just a really honest conversation with them about, this is what it's really like in a startup. Right?
Yeah.
This is what you guys have got to face. Here's kind of where you meet in the middle. Here are the things that you can take from here that you can maybe implement. But there are things that these guys do that you're never going to be able to do. And
that's right.
I think it was just really kind of refreshing, right? To be able to have those conversations instead of these adversarial.
I agree with that. And it's necessary, absolutely necessary. I would argue that it's not enough, but it's a start. Yeah. And it's the start you need. Yeah. You just need to act on it afterwards. But I think you touch on something else that is super valuable there, which is we are sort of 15 years into this, and we had some mental shapes that are just not the right ones. So interchangeably, a big organization would look at startups, new technology, new ways of working, and new business models as sort of being part of one bucket.
Yeah.
And try to sort of immerse themselves into learning about all of them. And I will say this, we have gotten very good at learning, which is essential. Again, it's not the end of the journey, but it's an absolutely vital part of the journey. But if I look at banks and startups, the two shall never be the same, as you rightly point out. And one of the main reasons why is that a startup has existential urgency. Yeah. Even a startup that is established and in scaling phase, right? You wouldn't call 10x a startup anymore. We're definitely scaling. There is still urgency to a business that is younger. And there's urgency that is existential. It's not cultural. There's a really big distinction as well, right? Is that, and I've had this conversation so many times, this perception by corporate that in startup there's no fear of failure, where the fear of failure is what drives constant. Absolutely, it's constant. But it's also the urgency of how much runway do we have, which as a startup you always have, will never be replicated inside a bank because it's artificial. Yeah. But equally, the responsibility to hundreds of thousands of consumers, the regulatory oversight will always create a different environment. So I think the first mistake that the industry has made is to think there is interchangeability in those experiences. You see a lot of the big banks who try to go for the startup mentality or a startup within a big company. You can't do that. And wearing jeans doesn't make you a startup. Now, the urgency that startups have, and they have it because they might run out of money. Like, it's very realistic urgency. You're not a startup anymore if you don't have that fear. You're in your scaling phase and you have other superpowers. But that urgency is what drove a lot of the innovation and a lot of the failure. Because let's face it, we never talk about the ones who are no longer around us. I've been in this business long enough to tell you that some of the golden children of 10 years ago are never spoken of anymore. Yeah. But that urgency is what drove the innovation. And what I keep trying to say in the book is the economy is now digital. The industry is not. That's where your urgency needs to come from. And you need to adjust your organizational decision-making machinery to be fit for purpose. For me, it's not about innovation anymore. When you look at the big banks, it's not about the startups disintermediating them. It's about the fact that they operate in a fully digital economy with regulators, particularly in countries like Australia, who are savvy and who are on a learning curve that is evidently faster than that of the banks. Yeah. They're saying, well, forget how you're going to be competitive. How are you going to be viable in a digital economy? Yeah.
On that note, it certainly seems to be that the convergence of blockchain, digital assets, seems to be a real thing now. And we're seeing, particularly here in Oz, some really exciting businesses starting to take shape. Last week, the RBA announced the CBDC pilot program. Some of my clients and networks and that program, as well as some of the big four banks. I know you have a kind of close collaboration with Swift as well through InnerTribe. It seems like, all of a sudden, the kind of scummy kind of crypto libertarian crazy thing is very quickly going to, how do we use this technology for atomic payments? How do we use this for cross-border transfers? And that's another threat that's kind of now really seems to be like a real threat, not a...
It's funny. It seems like it's changed real quickly.
Yeah.
The reality is it's sliced because the bro world of proper crypto is still at a fair distance.
Yeah, and look, I mean, that's, that's an area that I've been really keen to
stay away from. Yeah. And so I think what we all know what I mean when I say the crypto bros, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's fair to say that there is a world of that, a subset of that crypto world that has made a very conscious choice not to be a part of that.
Yeah.
And to be much more...
You're the guest that I feature on Blockchain Chatter, if you want to check that out.
So I think it's a choice, right?
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is that the CBDC conversation has definitely gathered steam in the last year or so. But arguably, it's been in the making for years because there were so many things that would have to be understood, become mainstream for us to be where we are. And I personally find all of these experiments very interesting.
Yeah.
My nervousness, and I think you and I talked about this briefly, but not with an audience, a few months ago, is my nervousness around citizenship and freedom and the ability to create programmable money will create immense capabilities for payments, settlements. Like the best use cases will be in the plumbing world, and some of the work Swift are doing in that is absolutely fascinating. But from a citizen's perspective, programmable money without a very, very comprehensive regulatory framework around what happens to information, what happens to choices, what happens if the bad guys get power?
Yeah.
Those things make me nervous, and we haven't thought them through. That doesn't mean we won't, but we haven't.
Yeah. I think what's really interesting with the RBA's kind of pilots, one of them, which is, to me seemed like the most obvious use case, and I think even had this conversation 10 years ago saying, once governments find out that they can program within a transaction the VAT or GST component and immediately get paid that, they're going to be all over it, right? And this is one of the pilot programs that one of the startups is running, which is a GST recognition,
which is
right?
such a great use case.
A great use case.
You know what's funny? This has left the hallowed halls of fintech ecosystem conversations, and it's actually a much more common conversation than we had realized. And I think part of that is driven by the fact that governments are involved, but also people are taking an active interest. So I remember until very recently, people who worked in banks still going, wait, what's Bitcoin again? And is DLT in Bitcoin? Those conversations, even people who are in the industry. Last time I was here a few months ago, I got chatting to a cab driver who, when he worked out what I did for a living, had some very thoughtful questions about CBDCs. And I thought, this wouldn't have happened a few years ago. And if we managed to start capturing the imagination of the population about the art of the possible, then that becomes very interesting, because we've sort of become resigned to the fact that everything is digital, but our banks aren't, our money isn't.
And I think that's a really interesting point that you make, because it's a conversation that I've had with so many banking execs, is that, hey, the stuff that I'm complaining to you about, my kids aren't going to tolerate this. They're not going to be on hold for 2 hours. They're not going to, right? You're going to lose the next, in fact, you're not even going to be in with a shout of even getting an opportunity to onboard the next wave of customers on the path that you're going down.
And that generational thing is very interesting, actually. My dad was trying to set up a payment in Greece a few months ago, and I happened to be there. And it just wasn't working. And I hacked the system, I confess, because I knew some of the very senior people in that bank in Greece. So I called them and I was like, can you help my dad? And then I met them a few days later, obviously to say thank you, but also what was going on? It's like, we had a bit of a system failure. So it created a loop. So my dad was kept sending back to the start of the process without getting an error message. My dad's almost 80, so he thought it was something he was doing wrong. I hacked the system because I happened to know someone senior in their bank. But he said, what would you have done if it had been you, out of interest? I said, I would have gone online and opened an account with a digital bank on the spot. And I wouldn't have closed my account with you, but I've done it. I actually, obviously I'm a Chase customer from day zero because they're a customer of ours in the UK. And actually, I use it more than anything else, but I opened my Monzo account a day that I was very annoyed with my high street bank. And I was always going to open a Monzo account because I wanted to play with it. But that gesture of, I've had enough of this. It's generational for sure. It didn't cross my dad's mind that he could do that. And also the sequential steps of opening an account, authenticating it, funding it, to carry out whatever you're trying to do feels like too many steps, but actually it solves your future heartache. Now, you and I are of a generation that has gotten comfortable with being multi-banked in a way that our parents weren't, and we're getting better at understanding what the art of the possible is. And I actually think that digital adoption curve is sharp. I don't even think it will get to your kids' generation. I think it's with every passing year, patience is low. And when you have options with digital alternatives, you will take, you remember we used to call them the open wallet moments. You will exercise it in a moment that a bank doesn't necessarily consider an open wallet moment because you're already a customer of theirs. You're trying to set up an international payment. The expectation is you'll come back when it works. But what if you don't? And as you have options out there, that becomes a burning question. What if you don't?
Now, we've talked a lot about bankers' woes, but what I also wanted to talk to you about was the process that you went through to actually write a book. You know, I've had people say to me, you should write a book. And I think, like, what am I going to write 300 pages about? Really. I guess, first of all, what was the kind of inspiration, the moment where you went, I'm going to do it?
It was done to me. So I've been writing my blog for Fintech Futures for quite a few years now.
Connected, right?
That's right. And Tanya Andressian, who is the genius behind that blog, she's the one who decided that there was something there that needed a home. She's the one who decided weekly was the right cadence. I was convinced nobody will want to read that stuff every week.
How on earth do you get something that weekly, right? I guess I do podcasts weekly. So.
Yeah, I write in batches.
Right.
And I tend to write on flights. So there you go. The lockdown was difficult because I had to I used to take my laptop and go and sit in the park during the first few months of lockdown because I have created... You need to create habits, and I'll get back to how the book came about. But you need to create habits. And for me, because I traveled so much in the times before and I travel so much now, I have this thing where I never get Wi-Fi on a plane, ever, even if they have it. Because it's nice to not be bombarded. So I used to create these little bubbles of time and space. It's time boxed. Even when you're coming to Australia, it's a long time, but it's time boxed. And you don't allow for external. So you write in that window. So if I have a 3-hour flight, I can draft and edit a blog piece, and that's what I do. And actually, when lockdown started, I used to take my laptop and go to the park because it's very hard to not be connected to the world when things are pinging. And so the blog has been a surprising success for me. Tanya's not surprised at all, but I was surprised because it's a very particular set of topics I deal with, but it has its audience. It has a community. It's a really
particular style of writing as well, right?
So it did surprise me that it had such a following. I mean, extremely pleasant surprise, don't get me wrong, but it was a surprise. And it's got a consistent following. It hasn't gone, flavor of the day. So it's been there for 6 years and it's consistent, which is an absolute gift. So Tanya was like, it's time. you're going to write a book. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't have the time. What would it be about? So she hacked the system and she reached out to Taylor and Francis and said, you need to talk to this author. She will be sending you a book proposal and then you'll have a meeting. And then, of course, I did it because I had a task to do and I'm very obedient like that. The original idea was to take some of the more persistent and or more popular themes of the blog. That did not work, as you've noticed. The book isn't actually made up of the blogs. There's the odd idea that is verbatim, and I actually had times when I was writing and I was like, wait, I'm pretty sure I've said this before.
I was going to say, did you feel like a bit of a cheat? You know, because a little bit. You read, right? And I think this is one of the things that, again, one of the reasons why I've not wanted to read books is because now with self-publishing, there's kind of, there's no kind of authority on the editorial. Yeah, content,
well, actually, right? Because this isn't self-published. And there was an editor, thankfully.
Yeah, exactly right.
Because I'm the queen of the typo as well, let me tell you.
But I guess, my point being is that if you go on, just Google it, right? It'll be write a book in 5 days, right? And it's like, just take what you've already written and just, and so did you kind of, as you were doing that, did you feel, hey, I'm being a bit of one of these Amazon #1 bestseller books?
I didn't actually, that sounds quite good. I didn't think of it like that. Well, so it went in a bit of a curve because at first I wanted to reuse certain pieces and reference them, but it was a bit of a Frankenstein. It didn't work. Yeah. And there are places where I have ideas, which I'm okay with, but there were a couple of times when I was like, I have said this before and I said it better. So I've gone back to find it. And of course, I give really weird titles to my blogs, as you know. So I can't always remember what I call. I know that I've said it, but 6 years worth of weekly columns, you can imagine. Yeah. I spent quite a long time trying to find it and then going, oh, actually, I didn't say it that much better. There were 2 or 3 places where I lifted a paragraph. And I felt like I was cheating my readers in a major way. Yeah. And I told the publisher and he was like, you're being ridiculous now. I mean, feel free to reference it if you want.
But I disagree, right? And the reason why is that like the end result is I'm not the only person to say that it felt like you were there in the room as I was reading it, right? Like which if you've put that much into it and you've put yourself into it and that then comes out on the page, right?
Well,
it wasn't
a page,
it was a PDF, right? So it's had a screen to go through as well. So
it means a lot to hear you say that.
Yeah, but in terms of, I guess, the kind of thinking behind it, is this part of some kind of bolder career move for you? Is it you setting the scene for doing the circuit at some point, or
not really, not yet, definitely. I got the bug though, because writing this book, I started writing this book, and of course writing against the plan I had given the publisher, and although that changed quite a lot, the overall intent and tone didn't. When I said to the publisher, let's scrap this book because I've actually worked out what I really want to write, and thankfully John was like, no, finish this book, then you write the other thing. But it was very much while I was writing this book, and this book, as you know, because you know me and you've read my stuff before, it's definitely a deeper, wider thing, but it tackles all the same themes that I write about. So it's familiar territory, but actually really fleshed out. And it feels amazing to have it into the world. It really does. But I feel that there is, now that I've done this, which I felt was a bit of a gap in the market, there is an even bigger gap of going deeper into, okay, what does actually doing the doing look like once you've gotten started? Because this is about getting started. Yeah. I want to write the book about what it looks like in the messy middle, as we say. To do that, you need the reality check of being in the work. Yeah. So I'm not moving anytime soon.
Probably you're going to reveal a lot of secrets as well, which might be a career limiting move.
Well, when I finish writing, I'm like, I'll have to retire now because no one will have me.
Yeah, which is kind of where I was coming from before with the other question. There's only so much they're going to ask, oh, you got to reveal more in the next one.
Well, a couple of times I have people messaging me, was that me? Are you referencing me in that piece? The answer I've historically given is I never, ever make the lines direct. And if I'm writing about a situation or a particular person, I tend to leave it a very long time so that it's not traceable.
Yeah.
Because it's never about shaming anyone or making anyone feel uncomfortable. So the chances are that something happened last week and you're thinking, oh my God, is that it? And it's random luck because I wrote that piece 4 months ago or something. However, if it resonates and it makes you think and it makes you question behavior and it makes you go, oh my God, I shouldn't have done this, then good. It's not about you, but it's for you.
Yeah. There's 8 billion people on the earth, right? But I think there's only about 10 or 12 different personality types. And those personality types, and I had a conversation this morning with someone who were talking about their next move and their current frustrations, and started to talk about certain reasons why we don't work with certain stages of business, take the earlier stage, and a lot of it to do around the founders and them being able to let go. And this guy was like, wow, you just explained my situation. How do you know all this? Because a founder is a certain type of person, and it takes those qualities for them, first of all, to do that thing. But look, they're kind of, in certain situations, like the behavior and the response that you see 100%. Is almost kind of identical.
Yeah. Well, as I say in the book, all banks are exactly the same, but in profoundly different ways.
Yeah.
And that applies to people's reactions to crises. It applies to different stages of business. Like, there isn't that much originality out there. Of course, the particular confluence of events in your life feels unique.
Yeah.
And in the detail it is. But you're absolutely right. The challenges we face, different phases of companies, the interactions between people, there is a universality to them. And actually finding that universality is both reassuring and actually how you solve for them.
Yeah. So on that point, I think we're talking about books and how there's not really that much originality, and I think it's kind of pretty much impossible to be original now, but what you can be is you.
Yeah.
What it can be is yours. And I think that's kind of what, I would say with your book is it's yours.
Yeah.
It's not you trying to do in the style of someone else, because
it's a very unique style.
It's a good formula and it's a seller, right? It's
what's funny? For anyone who hasn't read any of my stuff, it has a very particular style. I write in a very particular way. I'm aware of that. But it's unmistakable that it's me.
Yeah.
Somebody called me a couple of weeks after the book came out. I'm guessing they hadn't read it yet. Going, I really want to write a book myself. Who's your ghostwriter? And I was like, seriously? Okay. I hate to break this to you, but I do my own writing. I do all my own stunts.
Yeah. Now, in terms of, I guess, your experience and the of writing the book, what is the bit that stands out to you most? What are you going to kind of remember through this whole experience?
Writing a book's an extremely solitary process. And if you're doing it on top of a full-time job, because, I'm not an influencer,
I've got visions like Jack Nicholson and The Shining now.
Not so bad. But if you think about it, I work really long hours. I travel a lot, which makes my weekends quite compressed. And to write, a lot of people say you should write 10 minutes a day. I don't know how they do that. I can't. 10 minutes is nothing. I need chunks of time, which meant that I did a lot of my writing. If I was traveling, like on the evenings, if I was home, I would lock myself in a room for the daylight hours of Saturday and Sunday. So, and it's a lot of time when you're not doing other things that would probably be pleasant and fun. Because unlike some other authors, this is outside my day job and it can't be done at the expense of the day job, right? So it is done at the expense of your personal life, of your home life. So I'd say the first thing is that it's a very solitary process. You don't think about how many hours you're going to spend alone on this. The second is that it really draws heavily on the patience of those around you. Like my partner has been so good about it. He's been so good in that he didn't make a point about being good. He'd slide an egg and bacon sandwich across the table and just leave me to it. But do it in a way that it never occurred to him to not make it easy for me. And I can very easily see, including previous relationships of mine, how that would not be the case. But you need that support, because even though he didn't do the writing, it was at his expense 100%.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is that you finish this thing and you hand it to the publishers, and the editor first reads it and tells you if you need to tighten anything and rewrite anything. So you have that conversation around how it flows. And then it goes to a copy editor who goes through like commas and typos, and you're sure you want to write it like that. And that process is painful, but whatever, it finishes. Then it goes out. It goes out into the world. And there is that pause where the production editors are doing their thing and it gets printed. And then it's real, and it's in people's houses, and it's in people's bags, and that is a very weird feeling.
Yeah.
That's a really strange feeling.
Have you seen it in an airport news agency yet?
I haven't seen it in an airport yet, but I met a friend earlier this week in Sydney, and she had it in her bag and brought it for me to sign. And a friend of mine back in London sent me a photo of someone in her office reading it.
Cool.
They were having lunch and reading it, and she snapped a snap. I was like, oh my God. That's an amazing and very surreal feeling.
Before we wrap up, where can people get a copy of the book?
So it's available on Amazon. It's available on the Routledge website, which is the publisher, and I think they give a little discount. And if you really, really want it in a bookshop near you, let me know and I'll tell the publishers.
Awesome. Now I've got a question that is a kind of bit of a big esoteric one for you to wrap up. There's been a lot of talk about ChatGPT and AI and people losing their jobs and what will this mean? This is a kind of inevitability that I've been contemplating since the mid-90s, right? Which, kind of even before I started my career in recruitment. And none of this seems to be far-fetched or unrealistic. The narrative is now that what it enables people to do is to go towards their calling in life. I think what's been really interesting on this journey that I've had with founders has been to see the founders that not necessarily are the most successful in, say, the Deca unicorn, or but are actually genuinely happy and fulfilled and kind of healthy, is that they've found creative outlets within the role of creating a business, and they've found the things that have given them energy. From the experience that you've had, like, what do you take away from it, and kind of what are the things that you see as creative outlets and the things that give you energy?
So writing is therapeutic for me. Not editing, but writing. Because it allows you to process the world as you experience it. And, although I try to be a positive, constructive person, I get angry. I get frustrated. And I find that writing allows me to purge that and get to a place of constructive positivity. So for me, it's a mental health exercise, first and foremost. The second is, I think I need art in my life. I go to theater a lot, but I find that being immersed and transported away from something completely different is where I'll get those fresh ideas, and that doesn't work for everyone, but that's what works for me. And the other thing is the perspective of people who don't do this all day. You need to surround yourself with people who don't just do this, because the perspectives and the reality check. And it could be that you're dealing with some people who are more salt of the earth, and it gives you a reality check, or people who are working on some like seriously challenging and esoteric physics problem, and it makes you think, and both are good for you. So get out of that bubble. Get it out of your system, see something different, hear something different, and come back refreshed.
Where can people follow you?
I am at Leda Glyptis on Twitter and LinkedIn. I have pretended to go on Mastodon, but I just can't.
No Mastodon. And Fintech Futures, your blog, where can people go and read
My blog is available every Thursday on Fintech Futures. It's usually reshared under the hashtag Leda Rights. And there is actually a depository of Leda Rights where you can go back and read every single blog I've written in the last 6 years on the Fintech Futures website. I
think that's a really good place to start, because if people read that and they like it, I'm sure they're going to like your book as well.
I hope so. I really hope so.
Awesome. Well, it's great to see you again, my friend. Congrats on the book.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in and watching or listening. As always, you can connect with me, Dexter Cousins, on LinkedIn and Twitter. If you're new to the show, make sure to give us a follow and a review. And if you're watching on YouTube, a like and subscribe. If you're coming back, thanks so much for your support. Until the next episode, keep well. Fintech Chatter is presented by Tier 1 People, leaders in fintech executive search. We'll help you find world-class fintech leadership talent to build world-class fintech ventures. And you can find out more at tier1people.com.